Do you feel as though your dollar isn't going as far as it once did? Or do you find yourself unable to spend the same amount as before on the same amount of goods? What could be the cause? The cause is inflation, which is the term used to describe the progressive decline of the purchasing power of your money over time as prices gradually increase. The economic stability of several nations has been severely compromised by inflation. A common goal of central bankers is to be branded as inflation hawks. Politicians who pledge to fight inflation have won elections only to fall from grace when they don't deliver on their pledges. In fact, in 1974, President Gerald Ford proclaimed inflation to be the nation's #1 public enemy.
The tyranny of double-digit inflation is our common enemy in 1974.
What is inflation, therefore, and why does it matter? Welcome to yet another great video regarding money, wealth, and finance. Here, we highlight every necessary information, tip, and advice regarding finance, trade, and investments. In today's video, we will be discussing what inflation is and why it matters. If this is your first time on our channel, kindly hit the like and share buttons and subscribe for more tips on money, wealth, and finance. Let's get started. Inflation is often measured in broad terms, such as the general rise in prices or the rise in a nation's cost of living. However, it can also be computed more precisely for some products like food or services like getting a haircut. In any situation, inflation refers to how much more expensive the relative group of goods or services has grown over a given period, usually a year. With an annual rate of 7.9% in February 2022, inflation hit a 40-year high and contributed to yet another month of price increases for Americans. The cost of fuel, housing, and food increased more than those of other sectors at a faster rate. Fuel prices increased by more than 43% as consumers continue to pay more at the pump. Some gas stations in California have gas prices as high as $5.75 per gallon. Gas rates of $5 per gallon were seen in Nevada. Food prices increased by 8.6% for food consumed at home and 6.8% for food consumed away from home, while housing increased at 4.7%. Budgets are probably changing in many households given the impact that these costs might have on employees and businesses daily. Lax monetary policy frequently leads to prolonged periods of high inflation. The unit value of a currency decreases, which means that its purchasing power decreases and prices increase if the money supply increases excessively in comparison to the size of an economy. The quantity theory of money, which connects the money supply to the size of the economy, is one of the most well-established theories in economics. Inflationary pressures can also come from the supply or demand sides of the economy. Supply shocks that halt production, like a natural disaster, or a drive up in production costs like high oil prices, can lower overall supply and cause cost-push inflation, in which the cause of the price increase is a disruption in supply. A prime example of this in the global economy was the food and fuel inflation of 2008, when commerce allowed for the rapid spread of rising food and gasoline costs. On the other hand, demand shocks, like a stock market surge, or expansionary policies like when a central bank reduces interest rates, or when a government increases expenditure, can momentarily enhance general demand and economic growth. The strain on resources is reflected in demand pull inflation though. If this growth in demand outpaces an economy's capacity for production, when necessary, policymakers must strike the correct balance between increasing demand and growth and avoiding inflation by overstimulating the economy. Inflation is significantly influenced by expectations. If customers or businesses predict increased prices, they will factor these expectations into contract price modifications, such as automatic rent hikes and salary discussions. Due to the self-fulfilling nature of expectations after contracts are fulfilled and salaries or price increases are anticipated, this conduct contributes to the next period's inflation. And to the extent that individuals base their expectations on the recent past, inflation would exhibit inflation inertia over time if it has continued to follow similar trends. The cost of living for consumers is influenced by the cost of living for households, as well as the cost of a variety of goods and services. Government organizations undertake home surveys to determine a basket of frequently purchased commodities and track over time the cost of purchasing this basket to calculate the typical consumer's cost of living. The largest portion of the American consumer basket is made up of housing costs, including rent and mortgages. The Consumer Price Index, CPI, the most commonly used indicator of inflation, measures the cost of this basket at a given moment relative to a base year. Consumer price inflation, on the other hand, measures the percentage change in the CPI over a given period. For instance, if the current CPI is 110 and the base year CPI is 100, the inflation rate for the period is 10%. The CPI basket is generally kept consistent over time for consistency, but it is occasionally changed to reflect shifting consumption habits, such as adding new high-tech items and swapping out items that are no longer commonly purchased. The GDP deflector's contents fluctuate every year and are more up-to-date than the CPI's basket largely stable components, since they demonstrate how prices generally change over time for everything produced in an economy. The deflector, on the other hand, includes non-consumer expenses like military spending, and it is not a reliable indicator of the cost of living. Households are worse off when prices rise faster than their normal income, which they receive in current dollars. This is because they have less money to spend. In other words, their actual income after inflation decreases, or their purchasing power does. Real income serves as a stand-in for the level of living. The standard of living rises in tandem with rising real incomes and vice versa. Prices fluctuate at various rates. Others, such as wages set by contracts, take longer to adjust or are sticky in economic language, while some, like the prices of traded commodities, vary daily. Unevenly growing prices in an inflationary environment ultimately lower some customers' purchasing power, and this drop in real income is the single highest cause of inflation. For both those who receive and pay fixed interest rates, inflation might over time affect their ability to make purchases. Consider retirees whose pension is guaranteed to increase by 5% per year. A pensioner's purchasing power declines if inflation exceeds 5%. While serving this debt would be simpler if inflation were higher, as long as the borrower's income keeps up with inflation. A borrower who pays a fixed-rate mortgage of 5% would benefit from 5% inflation because the real interest rate, the normal rate minus the inflation rate, would be zero. Of course, the lender's real income falls. Some people's purchasing power increases and some decrease, depending on whether normal interest rates account for inflation. A lot of nations have struggled with significant inflation and in some cases, hyperinflation, which may reach 1,000% or higher annually. With an estimated annual inflation rate of 500 billion% at one point in 2008, Zimbabwe had one of the worst episodes of hyperinflation ever. It has been awful for countries to have such high levels of inflation, and in some cases, like Zimbabwe, rigorous and painful economic action have been required to reduce inflation to manageable levels. High inflation affects an economy, but drop in prices or deflation are also undesirable. To wait for lower prices in the future, people postpone purchases when prices are declining. This will result in reduced economic growth, less producer income, and less economic activity. Japan is one nation that experienced a protracted period of almost no economic development, partly as a result of deflation. One of the reasons the U.S. Federal Reserve and other central banks around the world kept interest rates low for an extended length of time and implemented other monetary measures to guarantee financial systems had plenty of liquidity during the global financial crisis that started in 2007 was to prevent deflation. Today, the majority of economists agree that low, stable, and most crucially, predictable inflation is beneficial to an economy. Inflation's distortionary effects are lessened when it is low and predictable, since it is simpler to include it in a pre-adjustment contracts and interest rates. A further factor that encourages consumers to buy sooner is the knowledge that prices will rise slightly in the future. This increases economic activity. Inflation targeting is a strategy used by many central bankers as their major goal in ensuring low and steady inflation. To reduce inflation, the appropriate set of disinflationary policies must be considered. If central banks are committed to maintaining price stability, they can produce contractionary policies that limit aggregate demand in an overheating economy. Typically, this involves hiking interest rates. With different degrees of success, some central bankers have decided to enforce monetary discipline by fixing the exchange rate, which ties the value of their currency to that of other currency, and, in turn, ties their monetary policy to that of another nation. Such initiatives, however, could not be helpful when inflation is caused by international rather than domestic factors. Many nations permitted the high global cost to trickle down to the domestic economy in 2008, when inflation soared globally as a result of high food and fuel prices. Sometimes the government will set prices directly, as some did in 2008, to stop high food and fuel prices from trickling down. The government typically accrues significant subsidy bills as a result of such administrative price-setting policies to make up for producers' income losses. The majority of individuals experience the effects of rising costs of living daily. However, the middle class and the poorly paid were particularly badly struck by these rising prices. Less money is available for savings or discretionary spending as a result of rising food, gas, and utility expenses. Consumers reduce their purchases, move to less expensive alternatives, or search harder for discounts as a result. When your wage isn't increasing at the same rate as the expense of living, it's very challenging to stay up. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more videos on money, wealth, and finance, as well as tips on investments, kindly like this video and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to enable the notification bell so you'll be notified whenever we upload new videos. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.